Okay, so what if our oldest, most foundational stories aren't actually myths? What if they're echoes of a reality that we've completely forgotten? We're about to dive into a fascinating theory, and it all starts with a book that was intentionally left out of the Bible, a book that might just hold a hidden key to our entire past.
Right, so this all kicks off with a text called the Book of Enoch. And this thing is ancient. I mean, it was found right alongside other scriptures we know today, like the Book of Isaiah. But when the time came to put the final stamp on the biblical canon, Enoch was left on the cutting room floor. And the reason why? Well, the prevailing theory is that its contents were just too wild, too nuts to fit the official story.
So what could possibly be so nuts about it? Well, we're not just talking about a few extra details here and there. The Book of Enoch presents a completely different origin story for humanity, one that involves forbidden knowledge, powerful beings from the sky, and a totally different take on who we are.
At the very heart of this story are these beings called the Watchers. The text says they were angelic figures who came down from the heavens. But here's the twist. They weren't just here to watch. No, they decided to get directly involved with humanity's development, and that's when everything changed.
And their involvement? According to this book, it was absolutely catastrophic. The Watchers mated with human women and created a hybrid race of giants, the Nephilim. These beings were said to be so powerful they would just consume and destroy everything in front of them. On top of that, the Watchers taught humanity things we weren't supposed to know, forbidden arts and sciences that basically unleashed chaos on the entire world.
So this brings up a huge question, right? We're talking about a legitimate religious text, ancient, verified, found with all the others. So why in the world did a council of a few rabbis, way back when, decide to just take it out? To remove it from the story that billions of people would come to know?
Because including the Book of Enoch wouldn't have just added another chapter. It would have completely rewritten the entire story of the human race. It suggests our origins aren't just from here on Earth, but that they're celestial, and maybe, just maybe, the result of a massive experiment.
And this is where it gets really cool, because this idea of an alternate origin story, it plugs right into a much bigger puzzle. The actual physical history of our own evolution is so much stranger and more complicated than the simple story we all learned in school.
Our own family tree is constantly being redrawn. The fossil record is always changing, and it's showing us that the past was way more crowded than we ever thought. I mean, think about it. Just in the last few decades, we found skulls that push our own origins back by 500,000 years. In 2010, they found a completely new type of human, the Denisovans. The big takeaway here is this. We were not alone. The planet was buzzing with different kinds of humans, all living at the same time. And let's just talk about our most famous cousins for a second, the Neanderthals. You know, we have this image of them as dumb brutes, but they actually had larger brains than us. Their bones were thicker, way more dense, and their eye sockets were enormous, which leads some scientists to think they might have had night vision. They were stronger, tougher, just built different. So this all leads to a pretty wild what if. What if Neanderthals were, say, version 1.0 of humanity, and we, Homo sapiens, more frail, maybe a little more clever, were version 2.0? What if our sudden appearance on the scene was the result of a deliberate genetic tweak, maybe by those same Watchers from the Book of Enoch?
Okay, so this whole idea of a true story getting twisted over time isn't just about one forbidden book. It makes you ask a much bigger question about how we should look at all of our ancient myths and scriptures.
The argument here is that these ancient texts aren't necessarily lies. Not exactly. Instead, think of them as the end result of the longest game of telephone in human history. They might have started as accounts of real events, but after being passed down for thousands of years, the original story got completely distorted.
I mean, you can just imagine how it would happen. A real event takes place, like a catastrophic flood after a comet impact. The survivors tell the story to their kids. For generations, it's just passed down by word of mouth. Eventually, someone writes it down. Then that gets translated and retranslated and reinterpreted. By the time it gets to us, the original scientific event has turned into a myth, a parable with gods and monsters.
And you know what? We see clues for this everywhere. Take the Great Flood. That story isn't just in the Bible. It's a memory that shows up in countless cultures all over the planet, from the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia to all sorts of indigenous traditions. It really suggests that a real, global event might be the common ancestor of all these myths.
But this is where the theory takes one final, absolutely mind-bending turn.
It asks us to question not just the story itself, but the very reality where these events were supposed to have happened.
The theory that's proposed is really profound. What if these foundational stories, Adam and Eve in the garden, the Tower of Babel, what if they didn't actually happen in our physical history, but took place in an alternate dimension, on a whole different plane of reality?
The idea goes that this alternate dimension sort of merged with our own over a long period of time. This could actually explain why we've never found archaeological evidence for the Garden of Eden, but we do find evidence for later events in the Bible. It wasn't just a story unfolding, it was a transition from one reality into ours.
And that reframes everything, doesn't it? Even the creation story. The Hebrew word used for day, yom, doesn't just mean a 24-hour day. It can also mean a stage or a period of time. So the 7 days of creation might not be a literal week at all, but 7 vast stages in this cosmic process of one reality unfolding into another.
So in the end, we look to these ancient texts for the history of our world, for answers about where we came from. But maybe the biggest question we should be asking isn't just what happened, but where did it happen? Are these incredible stories the literal history of our physical world, or are they just a faint, scrambled echo from another one entirely?